Now, Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelensky has ordered an audit of all bomb shelters in the capital. It comes after 3 people were killed on Thursday when they couldn't enter an underground facility following a Russian missile strike. Now, Moscow has continued to hit the Ukrainian capital once again today, the 6th day in a row Kyiv's been targeted. The U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says Washington is seeking just and lasting peace for Ukraine. The comments were made in Finland earlier today. Blinken called Russia's war in Ukraine a strategic failure as he visited NATO's newest member.
We made every effort to get Moscow to de-escalate its manufactured crisis and resolve its issues through diplomacy. President Biden told President Putin that we were prepared to discuss our mutual security concerns, a message that I reaffirmed repeatedly, including in person with Foreign Minister Lavrov. We offered written proposals to reduce tensions. Together with our allies and partners, we used every forum to try to prevent war.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken speaking there. We can now bring in Peter Zalmayev, Director of the Eurasian Democracy Initiative, who joins us from Kyiv this afternoon. Thank you very much for speaking to us here on France 24. Talk us through what exactly Russia is hoping to achieve with these consecutive days of strikes on the Ukrainian capital, because it seems that things like critical energy infrastructure has not been targeted this time around.
Not indeed. Let me just first sum up, the last month. The capital of Ukraine suffered at least 18 attacks just in the month of May alone. And yes, you're right. Most of them have been concentrated, a combination of Iranian-made Shahed drones and missiles, including ballistic missiles, Kinzhals. They've been, directed at the capital, and it is clear that, Vladimir Putin suffered a significant loss of face when what is purported to be Ukrainian drones were sighted over the Kremlin, were shot down over the Kremlin. Since then, Moscow has suffered several waves of drone attacks, obviously a huge loss of face for Vladimir Putin. So there's a desperation in the air, quite literally, when his aides are reporting to him that they are hitting Ukraine's Patriot anti-defense systems. And Vladimir Putin is under the impression that a few more such barrages, and finally they'll be able to show their TV audiences that, let's say, the Ukrainian parliament or the president's office have been hit and destroyed. This is something that Vladimir Putin is terribly in need of. Needless to say, the latest incursion of Russian citizens operating from the territory of Ukraine into the Belgorod area of Russia, which is in the southern part of Russia bordering with Ukraine. This is the second such attack. It's happening on the territory of Russia. It's quite unprecedented. And you can just imagine what's happening now through Telegram channels. All these war correspondents and warmongers are accusing Putin of really dropping the ball. He's looking increasingly weak. And so these barrages you asked me about, I think they are a sign of desperation.
And we have seen attacks being carried out inside Russian territory by groups based in Ukraine. Is this part of that counteroffensive as well?
Ukrainian officials have already dropped hints here and there that we are already seeing the counteroffensive in progress. Obviously not its main thrust, but, a hybrid sort of way to begin it. Mind you, Russia has been waging a hybrid war against Ukraine and against Ukraine's Western backers, I would also venture to say. And Ukraine is really following the lead. Obviously, Ukraine is still outnumbered and outgunned. It cannot afford to stage, kind of good old, frontal attacks against the world's second largest army. This is what, Russia has claimed all along. So what you're seeing is a softening of Russia's positions, both on occupied territories. Just today, a huge strike on the port in Berdansk on the Azov Sea was reported. It's happening throughout the occupied areas. And now, finally, we're seeing incursions into the Russian territory, which are meant not only to change the informational narrative and create panic among Russians and Russian military command, but also to force Russians to relocate some of their forces fighting in the Donbass, let's say, to cover the border, which means weakening Russian forces for the coming main thrust of the counteroffensive.
Peter, we had the French President Emmanuel Macron the other day who said peace will only be decided on Ukrainian terms. What does peace look like for Ukraine today?
Well, peace looks like something that is definitely not what happened following 2014 and 2015. You could make an argument that we have sort of had this peace since 2014, which we haven't. We've had this ongoing war with Russia for 9 years now and counting. So when we talk about peace, we definitely don't talk about some kind of a ceasefire, which is what Russia's buddies in BRICS, such as Brazil and South Africa and China, first and foremost, are agitating for. Stop giving Ukraine weapons and let's sit down and talk. This is a ruse, as we see it, by the Russian Federation to freeze the war so that Russia has time to retrain, to rearm, and strike against us.
Peter, can I jump in there for a second? Because you spoke
Sure.
about Russia's buddies in BRICS. Because one of the things Ukraine and Western nations have tried to do is sort of shape the narrative for the global South, something it has been unsuccessful in doing over the past year and a half. We've had multiple personalities from the United States, from Europe, from Ukraine, who've gone to various countries in Africa and who haven't managed to change anything realistically on the ground when it comes to this non-aligned stance many countries in the global South have.
Yeah, as far as like the world's sympathies, it would be naive to say that the entire world is lined up behind Ukraine. Yes, most of the countries will acknowledge, with the exception of some outright outcasts such as Syria and Iran, that Ukraine is fighting a righteous war. But they claim that it's not their war, and they will be under no obligation to join the sanctions regime against Russia. Having said that, still, when it comes to the instrumentality of it, even South Africa, which was just recently reported as having supplied clandestinely Russia with weapons, is denying that it ever did so, because there is the secondary sanctions that America is enforcing. They are working. And so, yes, we still have to win the hearts and minds of the so-called global South, not for lack of trying. Ukraine has understood that it has been missing in action when it comes to that. And so we have our officials, including the foreign minister, fanning out across these continents, including Latin America and Africa. There's work to be done to counter this message that Russia is trying to sell, that Russia is fighting an anti-colonial war against the Anglo-Saxons, as they claim, whereas it is in fact Ukraine that is fighting against its former metropoly.
When it comes to NATO membership, this is something that has, of course, ruffled feathers in Russia in the past. What would be the ideal situation, in your view, that Moscow would be willing to accept?
Well, Vladimir Putin, I don't think at this point is willing to accept anything short of Ukraine's capitulation. He sees that this would be a sure stepping stone to his demise, both as president and as a human being. This would spell his death. No Russian leader has lost a war in such a dramatic fashion and lived. If several years ago we could have, considered some sort of a security arrangement for Ukraine, right now that Vladimir Putin has pretty much announced that Ukraine does not exist as an independent country, it should be erased from the map of the world. NATO remains the only guarantee of Ukraine's long-term security. And that's why we're at such loggerheads, at such an impasse, that Vladimir Putin is not willing to offer anything, that the Ukraine's Western countries are offering him, which is, return to the February 24th borders, and Ukraine is not willing to take anything other than a full promise of a full NATO membership.
Peter Zalmayev, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us on the program today.